Hey, what's up, everybody? Time for another game theory video. If you like the videos, like, sub, silly, comment, share, support the channel if you can. I appreciate it. Thanks, super chat, super Patreon, super like, whatever it's called. If you do, I appreciate it. Thanks. Today, I want to talk about polarizing characters and why polarizing things are good, but the difference between sort of like a polarizing character and a character that actually requires the game system to be different, or does it? And a lot of this, goes back to what I've talked about many times before, because and this actually is getting brought up because I got asked a few times in some comments recently, like, oh, Dizzy's thing is just a gimmick. I don't like the characters of Strive basically either. And I always say it's not that these new games don't have anything new, right? Like lots of these new games actually show off, potentially cool new shit. But it's just so often that these new games are made by people that, first of all, they shouldn't be making the game anyway. I've said so many times before, if you can't appreciate Street Fighter 2, if you hate Street Fighter 2, you shouldn't be making fighting games in the fucking first place, right? And especially if you can only appreciate one style of character, you should not be given free reins over how to make a video game, fighting game, right? And too often you see that these people making these fighting games nowadays, they only like one style of play, right? And that is, I think, one of the reasons why you see so many of these games are so foundationally and fundamentally flawed, right? And, look at Strive. Like I said many times before, I like the characters in Strive. Now, I do think that I can appreciate, I shouldn't say I think, I can appreciate that, maybe these characters aren't exactly how you would like them to be. And I also think that they are sort of EX characters, right? For what it is. But I still think they're great fucking EX characters, right? I think they're done awesomely. I like some of the new shit they do, right? Some of the new gimmicks that they have. A gimmick doesn't have to be bad because ultimately, generally speaking, especially a 2D fighting game, it's two characters on the screen, it's some background music, right? You got background music, a background, and two characters fighting on the screen. What are you going to do with the genre? I mean, this is what you're trying to do, something new in this scope, right? So it's pretty hard to actually throw new spins on a fighting game in the first place. So anytime there is a new spin on a fighting game, I think that's potentially interesting. But again, it's just that the foundation that these games are made on nowadays is extremely shaky and not good. And it's also made by people that can't appreciate every play style. So they shouldn't be making games in the fucking first place. But talking about polarizing characters, polarizing characters and gimmicks and the difference between having stuff that is polarizing and actually changing a game, let's say, or that you need to work around the game. Again, I said so many times before, and this is, so many of my videos talk about the same thing because this shit does not change, right? It is not that hard to actually predict games if you know how fucking video games work, right? Super Turbo. Why do I use Why do I use Super Turbo so often when I talk about fighting games? Because Super Turbo is such an amazing game, right? It has many different, perhaps polarizing, you could say is a strong word, but there's so many different tactics that are effective at every fucking level of Super Turbo, even 30 years later. 30 years later, you can watch Super Turbo in every tournament, Japanese tournaments, and every character gets played basically. Everything wins, right? So you could say there's many different sort of polarizing or different ways to win, methods of victory. Not everyone's win condition is the same, right? Not everyone even has to use a super to be effective. It is amazing how well Super Turbo is still holding up 30 years later. Fucking incredible, right? Let's look at a game. We'll do like plus R here, right? I've always said, you know what? Look at Cliff and Justice. They are, you could say, very polarizing characters in the game, especially a character like Justice, right? Has a lot of sort of lopsided matchups, perhaps where they win, lopsided matchups potentially where they lose. That's fucking awesome for a video game, dude. You don't want a fucking video game to be totally fucking balanced. Get that shit out of here, right? Cliff, another polarizing character. I think they're the best part of Plus R when I think about it because they feel a little bit different. And I've said so many times, I feel like Plus R, it really started to feel a little bit stale by Plus R. It just felt like every character is just kind of knocking you down into his bullshit, right? But, Justice and Cliff, of course, they knock you down into stuff, but they feel a little bit different. They're polarizing. And you know what the interesting thing is about, you think about a game like Plus R, and because I'm going to talk about Street Fighter 6 later and Strive, right? These are polarizing characters that can have potentially, you know, specifically, probably Justice, you would say, very polarizing matchups, you know. But guess what? The system didn't really change, right? Despite these characters being, you know, being very different, the system didn't change. I mean, when we look at a game like fucking Guilty Gear Strive, right? Guilty Gear Strive, they actually put in a burst because of Happy Chaos, because he was so polarizing, right? Is that not the reason? I mean, you could correct me if I'm wrong. That is why they put in a full screen burst, because Happy Chaos, they're like, we don't know what to do. Let's put in a full screen burst. Is that kind of, I think that's a little bit sketchy. I think that just in itself shows you there's some fundamental flaw in Strive. Besides the fact that, you know, took a year and a half into the game, they're like, oh, maybe jumping should have some recovery after you block, so you can't just chicken guard everything God thing in the game and punish everyone automatically. Oh yeah, but we've also been telling you the past year and a half it's the most risky game ever jumping. Yeah, sure. Oh yeah, the wall, the greatest mechanic ever. Year and a half into the developer interview. Oh yeah, so why'd you put in the interview, or why'd you put in the wall? What's the big mind game gonna be with it? The fucking own developer said we don't know. Yeah. Ridiculous. But a game like Plus R, although there is sort of Slashback has a parry, right? But that was Accent Core before this, and not that I even like that, to be honest with you, but, you know, I'm not horny about parries. But, you know, Guilty Gear is a game, the old school games, that you could say that there's a lot of fucking shit in the game. There's a lot of potential bullshit. But you know what? They never patched the game and specifically put a mechanic in the game because they're like, this character is just, we can't fix him. Right? I would say that's kind of a polarizing to the fact that it changes the game. Right? Although there are games that, you know, potentially have mechanics, like I've said many times before, a move like Vegeto's Banshee Blast in Dragon Ball Fighter Z, that's a move that can't really exist in any other game, right? But if we're talking about, you know, character archetypes and the way the system works, because the way the system works in the game, guess what? With reflecting and homing dashing, this allows a potential new, which should have been, like I said, they should have focused on this meta more in the game instead of just being like, oh, it exists. But that's why I said you should have had completely new character archetypes in Dragon Ball Fighters that completely focuses on this sort of meta, because this sort of meta cannot exist in any other game. And they should have gone, you know, full boner with it, you know, but unfortunately, but anyway. But, you know, again, going to the negative here. Think about a game like Street Fighter 6. Again, another fundamentally flawed game. I think you could actually make the argument, because the game is so fundamentally flawed and so overly pre-planned and all this kind of bullshit. But then you have a character, let's say, and not that there's never, you know, I'm sure there's certain setups with Blanca that, oh, this is a really good setup. We kind of lean towards doing this a little bit more, right? But let's just say, you know, Blanca in Street Fighter 6 with all his crazy mix-ups, guess what? And a character like JP, all his fireballs all over the shit, maybe Capcom was like, you know what? These characters are a little too free reign. They're a little bit too polarizing in the game. And God forbid we actually, you know, add some more polarizing. I say now, I'm just, you know, using the word a little bit freely here, right? Add a little bit, you know, God forbid a Dragon Punch is actually invincible at the startup. God forbid that maybe just say these characters are very weak. Their mix-ups don't work versus characters with Dragon Punches. So we're just going to put in a system for the game to parry, right? That's why I kind of feel like parry was put in the game just because they're like, we don't want to make characters actually that unique, even though, if anything, Street Fighter 6 is the game that should have the most unique character when you look at it, right? When you think about gimmicks and everything like that, right? You would think, right? But or the most different, at least Ryu and Ken. But then you're like, oh, everyone pokes the same way. Oh, everyone, this is my, oh, I have drive versus here. Oh, my meter versus your meter. But we all use meter in the same way, right? You know, it's kind of, and then let's put in parry because, you know, Street Fighter 3, people like that. And you know what? we don't know what we're gonna do with all these mix-up stuffs and all this fireball shit. So parry, right? I mean, I would say Street Fighter 6 is an example of a game that they're kind of like, let's put in parry because of characters like this and little pop to Street Fighter 3. Not that you never use it for anything else, take that with a grain of salt. But and that's why I say when I think about a game like Street Fighter 5, I'm just going back to the people complaining about Strive. Or we'll talk about this first. There's a guy who's like, oh yeah, the ice thing with Dizzy and all the angel wings. This is just a gimmick and everything like that. And my thought is, again, gimmicks aren't bad, dude. I don't think having a new gimmick, right, is bad, right? I don't think Dizzy, she has a ice and then, the other guy, because their runs always are on the ground, so they're affected by the ice more. But Dizzy, she flies over the ice when she runs, so she's not affected by it the same way. I think it's cute. I think it's interesting. The wings of light, it's interesting, right? I mean, again, I think Strive still has interesting ideas, but then you're like, ooh, the game itself sucks. It's fundamentally flawed, right? It's just, I don't think gimmicks are bad because, again, ultimately, it's pretty hard to put any new spin on a fucking fighting game, I think, right? Gimmicks aren't totally bad. Street Fighter 5 with the fucking V skill and V trigger characters having a little bit of gimmicks there, a little polarizing, you could say. And again, I'm being a little bit loose with the word here. A little bit polarizing usages, let's say, of, V gauge and V skill. I don't think that's bad because, again, how often can you actually put new spins on games? But then so often you just see they're fundamentally flawed. You go to a game again like Strive and you're like, oh, well, we're still on Strive. And it's like Happy Chaos, a polarizing character. But you know what? The game is so fundamentally flawed. It's like, God, this is just, they're like, what do we do with this character? Like, let's just change the way the bursts work for this entire fucking character. Because God forbid, we actually make a good game. I don't know. That's just me rambling about games. I just think it's interesting that, again, I go back. It's interesting that you look at a game like Super Turbo and you're like, wow, so much shit is effective even 30 years later. And guess what? They didn't have to put in there's no new system in the game, right? There's no new system in the game to make it work. Characters like Cliff and Justice, very polarizing, and, Plus R was actually updated. It did get a little bit of a baby update, right? It got balanced at some point. I think Cliff and, who got balanced in? I think Cliff and Zappa. Am I correct? They got a little bit worse in the update to Plus R. But whatever the case, polarizing characters, but that's cool. Characters should be different, right? Street Fighter 6, fuck me. Oh well. Again, as usual, I think games nowadays, they can still come up with interesting ideas, but you got to have like a good developer or a good director, and he's got to be able to pick out the good ideas from the bad ideas, right? If little Timmy came up to me and he's like, oh, icicle, wings of light, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. I like that. And he's like, yeah, and I don't like dragon punches, so just make those not invincible. I would say, Timmy, go back to fucking Dizzy. I like your Dizzy idea. These other ideas, they suck. Go back to Dizzy. It's just, and of course, I'll never understand why you have these anime games. And, from a certain perspective, I do think that, even, obviously you think of Street Fighter 6 and, character like Blanca having anime mix-ups. I'll never understand why there's mix-ups and stuff like that are only becoming more powerful, are only becoming more anime. And there is this constant fucking hatred for fundamental stuff that made fighting games in the first place, like Dragon Punches. It makes no sense to me. And then you have super fucking ridiculous shit like Strive, where they actually said it's going to be the most risky game ever to jump in. And it's like, you don't have to FD to block in the air anymore. It's just so fucking weird. And it just is. And then you see, it's made by people that don't like Dragon Punch characters. And they only like one type of character. And it's like, why are they fucking working on the game, dude? Why do you have people that only like one style of play? It makes no sense to me, dude. You need, like, if you hate Street Fighter 2, why are you fucking, why are you fucking working on a fucking fighting game, dude? You know? It just is. And that was a suspicious sound. That was the, just in case person's gonna be like, oh, Clayton made a toot. Fucking Clayton hacked his toot. Clayton hacked his tooting on the FGC on NBC. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to talk about this shit all the time because it's just not changed. It's just, I don't know. Maybe one day we'll have good fighting games again. I don't know. Bobby didn't draw pee-pee. I just didn't think of drawing a pee-pee. I'm sorry, Pikachu. Well, draw it already. I miss it. Okay, what kind of pee-pee? I'll do a purple one. All right. That's a big one. Sure is, Pikachu. Oh, Jesus, Bob. Why does it look like that? Anyway, if you like PPs on the FGC on NBC, or like the videos, like, sub, comment, share, support the channel. I appreciate it. Thanks. The end.